seriously popular.
Welcome to the trial podcast, The Inquiry. I'm Caroline Cheetham.
And I'm Liz Hull.
We'll be back in a second.
Decisions.
Wait a minute. Are you still looking for cars on Carvana?
Yeah, decisions.
When I used Carvana, I found the exact car I was looking for in minutes. Bought it on the spot.
Electric or full diesel? Decisions.
Come on, you've been at it for weeks. Just buy it already.
You're right. Crossover it is. Decisions decided.
Whether you know exactly what you want or like to take your time, buy your car the convenient way with Carvana.
When you think about super successful businesses that are selling through the roof, like Heinz or Mattel, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But there's a secret. The business behind the business, making selling simple for them and buying simple for their customers. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout as Heinz and Mattel. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/promo.
I make it absolutely clear that it's not for me as chair of this public
The decision
inquiry.
to move Letby to day shifts raises serious questions which we will be investigating. Was there a cover-up? If so, why?
I would pray for God to save her. He did. He saved
The
her.
convictions stand.
But the devil found her.
In August 2023, a neonatal nurse called Lucy Letby was convicted of killing and harming 13 babies in her care. She was sentenced to 14 life terms and declared one of the country's most prolific serial killers. A year later, she was convicted of attempting to kill another baby and given another life sentence.
All this happened in the Countess of Chester Hospital over the course of a year from 2015 to 2016. But what went wrong? Who knew what and when? How was a nurse able to kill and hurt babies on a ward under the noses of her colleagues?
The Thirlwall inquiry is now underway in Liverpool and will attempt to answer these questions and more. We'll be there covering events every day. So it's been another busy week in Liverpool as the inquiry gets through plenty of witnesses before they take a Christmas break towards the end of next week. Today, we'll bring you the evidence from the assistant coroner who didn't quite agree with what Ian Harvey, the medical director, told the inquiry last week.
Welcome to episode 17. The coroner was never told about Lucy Letby.
So we'll come to what the assistant coroner said shortly, but before we do come to that, one of the key people this week was Duncan Nichol. Now, he was the chairman of the board at the Countess when Lucy Letby was working there. We brought you a bit of his evidence in our update episode on Monday.
Yeah, and what's also important about Duncan Nichol is he was also a senior NHS leader when Beverley Allitt was attacking patients in Grantham, and he was tasked at the time with circulating the conclusions of the Clothier report, which is the report that was done after her convictions. He was reminded by Rachel Langdale KC, the barrister to the inquiry, of one of the key recommendations of that report.
The main lesson from our inquiry and our principal recommendation is that the Grantham disaster should serve to heighten awareness in all those caring for children of the possibility of malevolent intervention as a cause of unexplained clinical events.
She asked him about training and if staff at the Countess knew what they should do if they had concerns about a colleague.
Can you remember if in that training what to do where suspicions about a member of staff arose was discussed, or was it training about safeguarding, protecting children from actions of family members?
I remember it predominantly being about protecting children from, vulnerable children in particular, from risks in the community and risks that they might encounter. I don't recall the detail of the training to any great extent, I'm afraid.
Did you at any time think that the fact that the neonates were tiny babies should have afforded them an even greater protection than vulnerable adult patients in the hospital. All patients who are vulnerable need protection, but children have particular protections afforded to them under safeguarding.
That's my instinct. They can't speak for themselves, and they would need someone to speak for them, so they are in a more less advantaged position from that point of view.
And at the beginning of life, with all the hope and expectations that brings for families.
Yes, I agree with you.
He was asked about a meeting he attended in July 2016, when Dr. Stephen Breary and Dr. Ravi Jairam were escalating their concerns about Lucy Letby. He said the doctors asked for the discussions not to be included in the official minutes of the meeting. Now, at this point, Lucy Letby had not been removed from the unit, and there were ongoing discussions about her being allowed back, but under supervision, which prompted Dr. Jairam to make an unusual comment.
And did he use the expression, the elephant in the room?
Yes, he did.
What does that mean, or what did you take him to mean by
the elephant?
Well,
I think by that he meant the suspicions about Nurse Letby's association with the timing of the death.
And one of the meeting's discussion points was whether she should be supervised, wasn't it? Whether she should be supervised working on the clinic, because the review was going to take longer. Should she still be able to work there while she was supervised?
Yes.
And the elephant in the room was him saying, I don't think that's safe and you shouldn't have that.
I'm not sure.
He was also asked about whether he doubted at that time that the concerns the doctors had were real.
Did you doubt at any time that Doctors Breary, Jairam and the other consultants had genuine misgivings and worries about the nurse?
No, I didn't doubt that.
Right.
Now, we know that Lucy Letby was actually not allowed back onto the ward, and she was moved into that admin role in the Risk and Patient Safety Unit. And it was over a year later when the police were finally called in, and shortly after that, Mr. Nichol said he was contacted by Lucy Letby's parents by email. He said they asked him for an urgent meeting and told him they were suffering intolerable anguish. Now, this was around 2 months after the police investigation had begun, and in their email they said, "It is now 1 year since our nightmare began. There is a saying, innocent until proven guilty, but it doesn't seem to apply to Lucy. She's still the only one of all the staff on the neonatal unit to be singled out for punishment." Now, Sir Duncan said he didn't respond to the email, but he thought the Chief Executive, Mr. Chambers, spoke to them instead. He also said he now appreciated there was a huge amount of sympathetic support given to Lucy Letby by the senior managers, which the board was not properly aware of. Crucially, he also accepted, as the senior managers have already done, that the families of her victims were kept in the dark by the hospital.
We didn't exercise appropriate duty of candour towards the families, and that was a failure, a serious failure. We were in the middle of a hugely complex process that we hadn't finished, but that shouldn't have meant we couldn't have kept people informed along the way, and we did not do that appropriately.
Ultimately, Sir Duncan apologised to the families, and he was visibly upset as he said the Countess of Chester had failed to keep babies safe in their care.
Now, the inquiry is also heard this week from Andrew Higgins. He was one of the non-executive directors at the Trust, and he's the man who was quoted as saying in a meeting that the shutters needed to be pulled down when he heard about the concerns of the consultants. Now, he said during meetings between the consultants, senior managers and members of the board in 2016 and 2017, relationships were difficult.
Caroline, this is something we've heard a lot about during the inquiry. Most of the consultants and senior managers have accepted that this was the case, and at times meetings and conversations were fractious. In particular, discussions about whether to call in the police or not were often difficult. Andrew Higgins was asked if he could have done more to speak to the consultants.
I feel that I made a mistake in not personally pursuing a line that may have been open to me. The reason that I hesitated or didn't do that was because aware that the situation was strained and incredibly fraught, and also subject to some formal HR processes, I frankly thought that if I were to directly, sort of independently intervene, then I could have made a bad situation even worse.
He was also asked about whether, because relations between the senior managers and the doctors had broken down, their concerns were being relayed fairly to the board. Miss Langdale read from the statement Mr. Higgins has already given to the inquiry.
At the time, I felt that the board was informed about the concerns of the paediatricians, but this was always in the context of them being a difficult group to deal with that had exhibited bad behaviour, a characterisation that came predominantly from Tony Chambers, supported by Ian Harvey.
I think I took it with a pinch of salt, in that what was clearly happening was that there were very fraught discussions and exchanges taking place. And I think one of the major targets in the executive team was probably the chief executive himself. So it didn't surprise me that he may have been the one providing the most emphasis around the bad behaviour of the consultants. But I just kind of took that as sort of something in the heat of the moment that may or may not be a fair characterisation of what was truly going on.
He was asked about his comment about keeping the shutters down, and he said his perception was the board was caught in a catch-22 situation because they thought at the time they needed evidence or something concrete to go to the police. But they also needed to protect the morale of other staff working at the trust.
We'll take a quick break there.
Nah, not quite.
What's up?
Sell my car on Carvana. It's just not quite the right time.
Crazy coincidence. I just sold my car to Carvana.
What? I told you about it 2 days ago.
When you know, you know. You know? I'm even dropping it off at one of those sweet car vending machines and getting paid today.
That's a good deal.
Oh, great deal. Come on. What's your heart saying?
You're right. When you know...
You know.
Sold.
Whether you're looking to sell your car right now or just whenever feels right, go to Carvana.com and sell your car the convenient way. Terms and conditions apply.
Bada boom, sold.
Huh?
Just sold my car on Carvana. Dropping it off and getting paid today.
Already?
What, you still haven't sold yours? You told me about it months ago.
Is
the offer good?
Oh, the offer's great.
Don't have another car yet?
I could trade it in for this car I love.
Come on, what are we waiting for?
You're right.
Let's go.
Whether you're looking to sell your car right now or just whenever feels right, go to Carvana.com and sell your car the convenient way. Terms and conditions apply.
So before the break, we were touching on this sort of fraught relationship at the top of the hospital. And another witness who was caught up, if you like, in this conflict between the senior managers and the paediatricians was a woman called Rachel Hopwood. Now, she's an accountant. She was also a non-executive director on the board. She was actually Sir Duncan's deputy. She gave the inquiry a little bit more of an insight into how dysfunctional the hospital was at the time, because she said how she was announced as being the hospital's new children's champion by Ian Harvey without any prior consultation or knowledge of the role.
Yes, I went to a QSPEC meeting and, sitting at these are busy meetings, there were probably over 20 people in the room. And I was, and Mr. Harvey, I'm sure it was, announced I was the children's champion, and no one had mentioned this to me. I went home. I was absolutely horrified because I had no idea what this was. I'd never experienced anything like it before in my time at the Countess, where I just found myself announced as something without consultation.
She said when she complained to Mr. Harvey about being put in such an uncomfortable and awkward position, he joked with her that the consultants were wondering where you were and why you hadn't been in touch. She said she got the impression it was just a token gesture, a position set up without much thought to try and placate the paediatricians and make it appear that they were being listened to by the board.
I think at the time it felt very throwaway, almost like we need to be seen to have this role. It didn't feel well thought out. There was no articulation. As I say, I'm sure I had 2 meetings with Mr. Harvey about it. And then I had a subsequent meeting with the paediatricians in October, which I think it's clear from those minutes, neither myself or the paediatricians knew what the role was at that point. And I do remember going back to the trust office. I certainly spoke to Mr. Cross, and I think at a later date to Sir Duncan, just laying out what some of the paediatricians' expectations and needs versus my ability, that I was in no way suited, and neither did I have a time commitment that would allow me to, say, attend these weekly meetings, which was the support they were looking for.
Now, another of the senior managers at the hospital who gave evidence this week was Simon Holden. He was the chief financial officer, and he said that when he joined the trust in 2016, it was considerably in debt. £10 million in debt, in fact. He said that when concerns were raised by the consultants about Lucy Letby killing babies, senior managers discussed their worries that if the reputation of the hospital was damaged and the unit was downgraded, then possibly less money would be pledged by the public for hospital charities. In particular, he said, the neonatal unit's baby growth fundraising appeal, which was trying to raise £4 million for a new unit.
So we know that in January 2016, they'd only managed to raise half of that target. And Mr. Holden said the cost of running the charity was outpacing donations, even before what he called any adverse publicity. And so their overheads were eating into that £2 million fundraising pot.
Now, one of the pictures that's been seen a lot is that picture of Lucy Letby smiling and holding up a baby grow that was printed in the local newspaper in Chester, and that's been widely used in the media since her arrest. And Mr. Holden told the inquiry that she was the face of the baby grow appeal. Now, Nicholas de la Poer is one of the barristers for the inquiry.
Just want to ask you about what you've just told us there about Letby being the face of the charity. What do you mean by that?
There was a charitable appeal specifically for the new neonatal unit, and there was various promotional material and leaflets and posters, and Lucy Letby appeared on quite a few of those.
He said he personally didn't make the connection between Lucy Letby being the nurse accused of harming babies and the fact that her picture was on all the posters and promotional material, because he hadn't long started at the hospital and he didn't attend all the executive meetings. But he accepted other senior managers may have done.
But anybody who knew about that documentation and knew about the nurse would have been able to make that link at the time when talking about the charitable.
Now, as we said at the beginning of the episode, much of this week's evidence has also been focused on what the coroner in Cheshire was told about the spike in baby deaths and the suspicions about Lucy Letby between 2015 and 2017. Now, we know that baby A was the only child that she murdered whose case was examined formally in a coroner's inquest. Now, an inquest was also planned for baby D, and the deaths of baby O and baby P were also reported to the coroner, but the police investigation began before any of those inquests could take place.
The inquiry is actually hearing from the coroner, a man called Nicholas Reinberg, today, but we know he'll say that he and his deputy, a man called Alan Moore, were never told about the consultant's concerns that Lucy Letby, or any nurse for that matter, was suspected of causing deliberate harm to babies. Mr. Moore is a solicitor and a retired army colonel, and he was Mr. Reinberg's assistant coroner at the time. He was asked about what exactly the coroner's office was told about what was going on at the Countess. And he said the first they knew about a cluster or spike in deaths on the hospital's neonatal unit was when he took a call from Stephen Cross, the hospital's Director of Corporate and Legal Affairs, in early July 2016.
Of course, the two triplets had died the month before, and the consultants had demanded that Lucy Letby be removed from the unit. They'd spelt out to the hospital managers that they believed she could be responsible for killing babies, and there'd been a series of meetings to discuss what to do next. And crucially, we know the decision was made to commission the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health to review the unit rather than go to the police. But even though he knew the doctors were worried that Lucy Letby could be behind the deaths, Mr. Cross never mentioned this to Mr. Moore in that phone call.
Now, we know that a driving factor behind the RCPCH review was the fact that the consultants raised concerns in a number of meetings that they had suspicion that a member of staff may be responsible for some or all of the deaths. Was that information communicated to you by Mr. Cross?
No.
If you had been told that, what, if anything, would have been your reaction?
I would have explored exactly what the concerns were that Mr. Cross or the Trust or both had, and if necessary, would have spoken with the police.
Mr. Moore said he remembered himself and Mr. Reinberg meeting Mr. Cross and the medical director Ian Harvey some months later at their office in February 2017. By this point, the Royal College review report had been completed, and the doctors had been told that it had found no wrongdoing on the part of Lucy Letby. But we know that the consultants were still unhappy because the review hadn't got to the bottom of the causes of the baby deaths. So they wrote to senior managers and the coroner, asking him to carry out his own review.
Mr. Moore said at that meeting Mr. Reinberg explained to Mr. Cross and to Ian Harvey in some detail and made it clear he had no legal power to carry out the broad review the consultants wanted, and neither could he revisit the cases of any of the babies whose deaths had already been examined, for example, baby A. He said in order to do that, a coroner needed fresh evidence or new facts.
He was basically saying, you're asking me to conduct a review. I have no legal power to do that at all. You're asking me to revisit the cases and hold inquests. I have no statutory powers as a coroner to do that. And almost finally, the coroner is not, or he, Mr. Reinberg, is not a form of governance for the Countess of Chester Hospital to review those cases in any other form. My impression was that he felt that Mr. Cross and Mr. Harvey, and perhaps the consultants, had completely misunderstood the role of a coroner and his legal powers.
Mr. Delaporte asked him whether either senior manager told him or Mr. Reinberg about the doctor's concerns that Lucy Letby or any member of staff could be responsible for the deaths.
There was no mention whatsoever of anything of that kind. If there had been, the outcome of this meeting would have been very different, I assure you. Mr. Reinberg is a very experienced, diligent and thorough coroner, and I have no doubt that he would have contacted the police probably before Mr. Harvey and Mr. Cross had left the room.
And had he not been immediately inclined to do that, what would you have said?
I would have made that call.
Now, we should point out that this doesn't exactly align precisely with what the inquiry has already been told, that Mr. Harvey told the consultants that he and Mr. Cross had discussed their specific concerns about Lucy Letby potentially being to blame. Mr. Moore said he might have seen Dr. Jane Horden's report, but he definitely hadn't seen the redacted Royal College report, which detailed the suspicions about Lucy Letby because, again, if he had, he said, he would have realised straight away that the police needed to be called in.
It's suggesting that there may be at least a suspicion that a person or persons may have been responsible for a death.
And just to spell it out, why is that of relevance to you as coroner?
Because that takes straight away from the coroner any jurisdiction to deal with the case. And it's a red flag to alert the police, at least for them to examine it and look at it.
Mr. Moore said that providing timely, accurate and truthful information to the coroner is fundamental for the inquest process, and the Countess should have disclosed all information relating to the baby deaths immediately, including deaths that had already been examined in an inquest or were awaiting one. He said they should have notified the police of any suspicions about any member of staff, and that it goes without saying that the bereaved families also ought to have been appropriately informed.
Now, we know, of course, that Dr. Jairam has admitted he didn't raise the issue of Lucy Letby at baby A's inquest, and he's told the inquiry already that he thought the senior managers had already told the coroner and that he was already aware of the doctor's concerns. But he said at the time, I just didn't have the courage to talk about it, and he regretted not being more explicit. He admitted he should have done better. Mr. Delaporte asked Mr. Moore about the importance of witnesses being candid with the coroner's court.
On the other hand, we know here there was a body of consultants who had a sincere belief that there may be a criminal explanation for these deaths. Are you clear in your own mind, Mr. Moore, that even though it wasn't a fact as far as they were concerned, nevertheless, you should have been told?
Absolutely. The coronial process is a judicial process. It demands complete candour from healthcare professionals, clinicians, nurses, and from hospital staff, and also from trust management. And a failure to disclose to the coroner any information which may have a material bearing on a coronial case, whether it's been through the coronial process already or is pending, is to mislead the coroner and to mislead the court.
So that's it for today. We'll be back with more from the inquiry next week before they have their Christmas break. In the meantime, you can catch up with any previous episodes or listen to the other trials in our series wherever you get your podcasts.
You can read my reports in the Mail and follow us at The Trial Pod on Instagram and on TikTok at Daily Mail Crime.
You can leave a comment on Spotify or send us a voice note on WhatsApp on 07796 657 512. Start your message with the word trial.
See you then.